Hello and welcome everyone to the Intrepid Museum's live virtual programming. Thank you so much for joining us for Star Stories today. We are so thrilled that you're tuning in and we'll be answering a number of your questions throughout the program. My name is Alicia. I'm an educator at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in New York City. I'll be your host today for the program. And just as a reminder, our museum's live streams are free. And if you'd like to support us in delivering this exciting new content, please do click on the link in the comments or in the description. So feel free to use the chat today to say hello and let us know where you're tuning in from. Let us know if you've ever been to the Intrepid Museum before. And of course, if you have any questions, you can pop them in there as well. So today we are going to be talking a little bit about the Intrepid's connection to space. So why we are a space museum. And then we are going to talk a little bit about stars and the constellations that we can find in the night sky, how the stars have been used to help guide people out at sea for generations. Now, see, a long time ago, we didn't really know much about the world other than what we could see immediately around us. And so it wasn't actually until we started going up into the sky and into outer space that we really got a sense of our planet and the rest of the solar system. But it all started just by looking up. So let's get started. Everyone, this is, if you are not familiar, the Intrepid Museum, the USS Intrepid, formerly. It was built in 1943. It served in 3 wars, World War II, the Cold War, and the Vietnam War. It was retired in 1974, and it was made into a museum in 1982. So we are currently docked right off the shoreline of Manhattan in the Hudson River. Now, if you are a local, maybe you visited before, or maybe you've passed us along the way, it is actually quite a beautiful thing to see on the outside, but it is, really, really big, really hard to miss. But really inside is where all of the magic is, where a lot of our cool artifacts are. So you can take a look at these. This one here, right here on the right, for instance. So this is one of our 4 propellers on the Intrepid, one of the things that help to move us through the water. And that is, of course, why we are a sea museum, because we are a naval ship that was out at sea during times of conflict. In this image on the left, you can see the ship racing along here through the ocean while it was in service. And also at the Intrepid, you can see a number of other cool things like planes. That's one of the things that we are very well known for. We carried planes. We are an aircraft carrier, right? That's what that name is. So that special name is what was given to ships that, like the Intrepid, had airplanes on them. They were able to launch and land on them. So kind of like a floating airport at sea. On this screen here, you can see some of the planes we have. On the left, we've got the Avenger, that big blue one. That was from World War II. It was a torpedo bomber. On the right, you've got that white one there. That is the Fury. It's a jet plane that flew really, really fast during the Cold War. So planes like these are, of course, why we are an air museum. We could fit up to 100 of them inside at a time, launching and landing, like I said, like a floating airport. So it is, of course, an aircraft carrier because it carried aircraft across the ocean. But again, that space part is what sometimes confuses people. Why are we also a space museum? Remember, sea, air, and space is in our name. Well, everyone, take a look at this. Can anyone tell me what this thing is? Looking at this big, black, kind of almost light bulb shaped thing. It says United States on the side of it. It's got a flag. Some people say it kind of looks like an ice cream cone that's been tilted on its side, or maybe like a megaphone that you might shout into. Anyone know what this is called? You can tell me in the chat there. This is something that was very, very important to our space administration early on. This, yes, I see in the chat, Michael, this is something called a space capsule. Very special because it's how astronauts used to go into space. Now, taking a look at it, you can probably see it's not very big. Maybe you can tell me in the chat, how many people do you think could fit inside of this capsule? Capsules like these, they roll on top of a rocket. The rocket, of course, is the thing that goes up away from the Earth into space. There's often lots of fire coming out of it, lots of smoke coming out of it in order to propel it all the way into the sky. But once those rockets and the capsules on top of them are up in outer space, they separate. So the rockets all come back down, and then that capsule is up there floating around in space, and the astronauts inside can complete their missions. So a while ago in the 1960s, during that Cold War era, NASA, our space program, was part of something called the space race. And we were in a race with the Soviet Union, what we would now refer to kind of as Russia. So the race, of course, has a finish line, and that finish line was to get all the way to the moon. But you don't really just roll out of bed and end up on the moon, of course. You have to take some baby steps to get there first. So these baby steps included things like how to figure out how to get into space in the first place, building those rockets. Once you were there, you had to make sure you could breathe okay, because we don't really have oxygen in space the same way. The astronauts also had to figure out how to eat and sleep and work for long periods of time, because eventually it would take up to about 2 weeks to get to the moon. So these capsules were part of some of those early steps, what they called Project Mercury. Thank you, Andrea, for mentioning Mercury in the chat. And this is the Mercury Capsule Aurora 7. This is what it looked like. So here, actually, on the right of this image, you can see what it looked like on top of a rocket, that little black kind of, I always like to say it kind of looks like a Hershey Kiss maybe on top of it. And so, yes, it is pretty small. Only one person could fit inside. If you said one, you'd be right. Now, in 1962, an astronaut named Scott Carpenter, who you can see on the left, went up inside of a Mercury capsule, just like this one. And, that word Mercury, have we ever heard that word before, Mercury? What is Mercury? And why do you think they called these missions the Mercury program? Does anyone have any ideas about that? Mercury. Let's take a look. So, everyone, you might have heard that word Mercury before because, of course, it is the name of one of our planets in the solar system. And it, like many other planets, got its name from Roman mythology. So, Mercury was the name of the messenger god. He was kind of like the mailman and was known for being really, really fast. So, you might often see him depicted looking kind of like this. There he is. So you can see he's got those wings on his helmet. He's got wings on his shoes. He's got wings on his little staff there. And all of those wings are supposed to help him go really, really fast. So Mercury, the planet, is both our first planet from the sun. You can see here, as the name might suggest, it is also then the fastest. In fact, 1 year on Mercury takes only 88 days. Well, of course, here on Earth, it takes us 365 days to go all the way around the sun. That's 1 year. 365 days versus only 88. So America wanted to be the fastest and the first to get to the moon. So they thought, yeah, Mercury is a pretty good name for that. So back to the Aurora 7 and Scott Carpenter. At this time in the space program, when capsules were coming back home to Earth, they wanted to pick kind of a softer landing spot so that they wouldn't be crashing into things like houses or the desert or something like that. So they thought a really good place to put them to land, a little softer place, would be to splash down into the ocean. They thought, the ocean is covering about 70% of the Earth anyway. Pretty good chance we're going to be landing in water. If you were following any of the drama with the Chinese rocket that was crashing down to Earth about a week ago, they didn't know where it was going to land, but they said, fortunately, the Earth is covered about 70% with water, so chances are good it's going to land in the ocean. And that's exactly what happened. It ended up landing in the Indian Ocean, and everyone was fine. So they chose the ocean again because it is very soft, a good place to land. And then, of course, afterwards, since they're out there floating around in the middle of the ocean, someone has to go pick them up again. You can't just leave your astronauts stranded in the middle of the ocean. So a helicopter would come to rescue the astronaut. And here on the picture on the right, you can actually see Scott Carpenter being picked up by a helicopter after his mission. He was then flown to safety. And then divers would help to come to retrieve the capsule. They'd bring it on board the closest ship. And then eventually these capsules might end up in a place like a museum. Really cool fact, though, again, Scott Carpenter was picked up, retrieved, and brought back to the Intrepid. Now, the Intrepid is really, really lucky because it got to do this not only for just that Mercury mission, but also a Gemini mission later on. We had 2 space missions. So Intrepid played a really important role in picking up astronauts and their capsules after they return from outer space. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we are a space museum. So here is Scott Carpenter, actually. Oh, this is what it looks like, not Scott Carpenter. This is what it looks like when they retrieved the capsules, as you can see here, out of the water. They are floating around with that yellow kind of floaty buoy thing around them to make sure they don't sink. And then, of course, here is Scott Carpenter on board the Intrepid. So very, very interesting, very, very fun that we have that wonderful connection to our space race. Here he is again, looking very, very snazzy in his Mercury spacesuit, that silver suit, surrounded by officers and onlookers on board the Intrepid after being picked up in 1962. So a very special occasion. Now, after the Mercury missions and Scott Carpenter, NASA sent up some other astronauts. Those other astronauts were part of something called the Gemini Project. I mentioned that earlier. In this pictures here, you can see Gus Grissom and John Young. So they went up inside the Gemini 3 capsule. And similarly, when they were done, they were retrieved by the Intrepid the very same way. But I want to talk a little bit again now about the name of these missions for a second as well. So the Gemini missions, what does Gemini mean? Can you tell me in the chat, does anyone know? Gemini, maybe you've heard that before. Take a look at these pictures. Think about how maybe the Gemini capsule might be a little bit different than the Mercury capsule that came before it. And remember, of course, now this is called Project Gemini. So have we ever heard that word before? What does Gemini mean? What is Gemini? Where have we heard that? What does it represent? Are you a Gemini, perhaps? So here we are again. Here's those two guys, Gus and John. And everyone, if you said that Gemini was, oh, I see Megan says twins. Yes, if you said that Gemini was twins or the constellation of the twins, you would be right. So look at that. That looks like two people, doesn't it? Holding hands. Now, what is a constellation? Well, a constellation is basically a picture in the sky. It's made up of a grouping of stars that we can see. So, a long time ago, people would actually connect the dots in the sky of the stars to make it look like things. They saw all sorts of things. They saw people, they saw animals, they saw objects, and they started to tell stories about what they saw. So if you look at that Gemini constellation, again, yeah, it kind of looks like two people standing right next to each other. So the constellation of the twins, thinking about our friends Gus and John, went up into space together. And so now we can understand maybe why they called this the Gemini Project, because it was the first time that NASA sent two astronauts up into space together. So the name was pretty fitting. And so we like to call attention to that because, again, that is one of our major connections to the space race. So before I continue on, I want to pause here. Do we have any questions to start us off about the Intrepid or any of our early missions into space or anything like that? Were any other NASA programs named after Greek mythology? Yeah, so actually pretty much all of them. You've got Mercury and Gemini, then of course Apollo, which came later, which took us all the way to the moon, which is kind of ironic because he is actually the sun god, Apollo, but they really like the idea and that image of him, pulling his chariot of fire across the sky, and they thought it kind of, reminded you of the powerful rockets that we had with all those flames coming out, and also it really represented the spirit of the mission. So that was Apollo. Now, of course, coming up in 2024, we've got the Artemis missions coming up. Now, Artemis was the twin sister to Apollo, symbolic, of course, because it is the name of the missions that will then be bringing our next man and first woman back to the moon. So she was the female twin sister, and she was the goddess of the moon and the hunt. But it's actually pretty interesting. Project Mercury was originally supposed to be called Project Astronaut. Doesn't have really the quite same ring to it. But it actually got its name before this. Of course, we had the term astronaut. Before astronauts, they took that from the term the Argonauts. So if you are familiar with Greek stories, then you might have heard of maybe Jason and the Argonauts, the ship, the Argo, that was in search of the Golden Fleece. So that was taken. And then, we also had aeronauts, who were people who flew around in hot air balloons. So they thought astronaut made a lot of sense because astro, of course, means stars. So they took that word knots and kind of added it to it. But, they didn't really want to make it about the people with Project Astronaut so much as the idea of the whole mission. So they went with Mercury instead to focus on the goal. But yes, lots and lots of Greek mythology, Roman mythology names. The rockets are named things like Thor and Atlas and Saturn and all sorts of things like that. So yes, definitely took a lot of inspiration from those stories. How many constellations are there? So there are 88 officially recognized constellations in the night sky. Of those 88, we in the Northern Hemisphere, where we're located here in New York City, we can see about 52 of them. The rest you can see from the southern hemisphere, so that's below the equator. But the constellations that we recognize were originally described by the ancient Greeks and Romans. Again, they corresponded a lot with their mythology. But of course, they're not the only civilization that saw images in the sky and connected those dots. Those are just the ones that are the most widely recognized today. But there's plenty other ones. We've got, Native American tribes saw different things with like Ursa Major and Orion, the zodiac signs. And there's also, of course, a number of really random ones like unicorn and a giraffe and a microscope and all sorts of things up there too. So great questions, everyone. All right, now I am actually going to switch to a different program here. We can actually find the Gemini constellation in our night sky, and I'll show you how in a second. I'm going to switch over here now to another program called Stellarium, which is going to allow us to see the night sky from where we are right now. So let me go ahead and get this up here for us. Okay. So what we are looking at here, and I'll actually make it full screen so we can see it a little bit better. Excellent. All right, so I'm using this program called Stellarium. It's a free program you can find online and use, or you can download it too, which has a few more features that are added to it. And this is going to show us in real time what our sky and the stars look like. So we are currently here on Earth. This is what the sky looks like right now in New York City. Might not look like New York City, might be missing a few planes or buildings and, things like that. But maybe, you can imagine that we are in Central Park or somewhere it's a little bit open and grassy, right? So let me ask you this right now. When you are looking up at the sky here, can you see any stars? Not really, huh? That's because we have an atmosphere that clouds our view when it is daytime. But my friends, have you ever wondered why the sky is blue? So a lot of people have wondered this throughout the years. Is it because so much of our Earth is covered in water? Maybe it's the reflection of the oceans. I used to think that when I was a kid. Or maybe there's an ocean up in the sky. Maybe that's how it rains, right? Some of the water is dripping out. No. So the real reason why the sky is blue is because our atmosphere, so that bubble that surrounds our Earth, just scatters blue light really well. It takes the light from the sun, it scatters the blue spectrum of it all around, and that's why we can't really see stars during the day. So although the atmosphere does a lot of really good things for us living here on Earth, it's not the best for looking out at the stars. Now, yes, technically, actually, we can see one really, really big star in the sky. We can see our sun up there. That's our own very special star. But that is all we can see. It's so bright that it messes with our view of the rest of the stars during the day because it's scattering all of that light. But in this program, we can actually get rid of the atmosphere and look up and see the stars. All right, so the stars are all there, my friends. They are just hidden until the sun goes down. So everyone count down with me. Ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Here we go. And now all the stars are coming out. Now, when throughout history people looked up into the sky, it might have looked like a bunch of, random white dots on a piece of black paper or something, maybe a big black piece of fabric. But, in fact, the Native Americans in the Pacific Northwest, they believed that at one point the sky was nothing but darkness. So they said that a young member of their tribe made a mask out of wood. He set it on fire, and he began to travel across the sky in order to light it up for them. So effectively, he became their sun. And that at night, all of the stars that came out were actually sparks and embers that flew out of his mask. But cultures then also started to notice that the stars were always very consistent, and their patterns, they always stayed the same in the sky. So as they started to realize this, they eventually mapped out the sky, and they started to identify and name these groupings of stars. Now remember, before I showed you that picture of Gemini, the lines were all drawn out and connected. We saw the twins. Well, of course, in the night sky, those lines aren't there for us. Again, we have to use our imagination. But what's really neat about this program is that I can add those lines to the sky for us. Let's see if they want to show up here. There we go. So we've got the names, we've got the lines. Now we can see the lines connected. And what's even cooler, we can actually also see pictures too. So we can actually see all of these beautiful images up in the night sky as well. Now, everyone, when we look into the east, we can also look for, again, that constellation of Gemini. Now, I can actually play with time here as well, and we can actually fast forward in time in order to see all of the different constellations that come out. So check out all these amazing figures. You can see all sorts of things, Hercules, a dragon, all kinds of really interesting things in the sky. What kinds of things are you seeing in here? Isn't that something? We can also see things from other sides of the world too, if we were to go to a different hemisphere. But right now, everyone, we want to look specifically for the constellation of Gemini. So oftentimes we can find Gemini in the northeast specifically. Let's see if we can find it. Speed up time here a little bit. All right, so we have another one coming up that you might recognize, but right here we can see Gemini. So there it is. We've got those twin brothers right there of Gemini. They're on their sides, but they're there. Now, there's those twin boys. You can see them more clearly. Gemini, again, is the constellation of the twins, and there's a story that goes along with why they're up in the sky. So the ancient Greeks saw these groupings of stars. They decided to tell stories, again, to help them teach lessons and to remember their gods who were important to them. So the story of Gemini goes something like this. They said, once upon a time, there were two boys, Castor and Pollux, and they were best of friends. So Castor's dad was a regular guy, but Pollux's dad was Zeus, king of the gods, which meant that Pollux was going to be able to live forever. But that didn't really bother him. They did everything together still. They played together. They went to school together. They never, ever did anything apart from one another. They were inseparable. And when they got older, they also both became great warriors together. But one day, a war broke out in their country. So Castor and Pollux went to go fight in the war together. But then something very sad happened. Castor was shot and wounded with an arrow and killed. So his brother Pollux was heartbroken because his best friend was gone. But Pollux went to his dad Zeus and he said, I know I'm supposed to live forever, but I really miss my twin brother. Would you let me give half of my forever to my brother so that I can be with him? Now, Zeus was so touched that his son was willing to give his life for his brother that he did something even better. He brought Castor back to life, and then he let them both live for half of forever. And then when that time was up, he put the two brothers in the night sky so that they would never have to worry about being separated ever again. So see, Gemini is a constellation, and it tells this story about friendship and brotherly love. So it's something that they could always look up into the night sky and see and remember that. All right, now can you think of any other constellations? You can name some in the chat for me. Does anyone have a favorite constellation? If you know your zodiac sign, which is based on the time of year when you're born, that might also be a constellation. For example, if your birthday is around now, actually, I believe we are getting into Gemini season right now. So that means that this is the ecliptic of the sun. So this is the path that the sun moves across the sky, the ecliptic. And it happens to be in whatever constellation it's in whatever month you were born. So I'm, for example, a Taurus. We just passed the Taurus season. I see we got some Scorpios in the chat. So yeah, it depends on where the sun was when you were born, but we are getting actually into Gemini season now. So happy birthday to all of you Geminis out there. Now, another grouping of stars that many people have heard about perhaps is something called the Big Dipper. All right, so I have another question for you. Is the Big Dipper a constellation? Let me know in the chat. Do you think the Big Dipper is a constellation? Anyone know? I see in the chat Ursa Minor. Okay, Ursa Minor is very close to it. That's the Little Dipper. Very nice. So everyone, the Big Dipper is actually not a constellation. It is something called an asterism. It is a smaller, recognizable grouping of stars that's part of a larger constellation. So the Big Dipper is not actually its own constellation. It is part of the Ursa Major constellation, which is right here. Ursa Major, as you can see in the sky right here, this is the Great Bear. And someone mentioned Ursa Minor. There's Ursa Minor, the little bear right next to it. But you can see right here, this is the Big Dipper. Again, it's kind of on its side here, but it sort of looks like a ladle or a spoon, right? A dipper. Here's the bowl part of it, and here's the handle part of it. Now, the Big Dipper has two stars that are called pointer stars. That's these stars right here, because they point to, boop, 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 right here, the tail of Ursa Minor. This is the North Star, or Polaris. So it's the tip, again, of Ursa Minor, the little bear, but it's special because it can always be found if you drop right down to the horizon, right here at our cardinal point of north. And the North Star is very, very important because it's what navigators use to map out the night sky in the Northern Hemisphere. So everyone, if I zoom out here just a little bit, and if I turn on, fast forward rather, our time, you can actually notice that all of our stars seem to rotate around that one star. So it always stays in the same place, and it is always fixed right there in true north. So they could always figure out which direction they were heading north. They could turn around if they needed to head south. And then they could also figure out where east and west was as well. Now, Ursa Major, as it's coming around here, also has a number of really great stories about it, the Great Bear. Here's a story told by the Iroquois Native American tribes of the northeastern United States. So they said that once upon a time, there was a great and terrible bear terrorizing their land. It was eating all of their food, which was no good. So all of the tribes got together and they decided they needed to do something about this bear. So they sent their 3 bravest warriors, possibly these stars right here, to go chase down the bear and hunt him down. Well, the warriors were really good, but the bear was always one step ahead of them. So they chased this bear all around the world, through the mountains, through the deserts, through the oceans, and finally the warriors were catching up to the bear. So the bear took one giant running leap and jumped into the night sky where the warriors couldn't follow him. But before he was in the sky, the bravest of those 3 warriors let loose an arrow from his bow, and he struck the bear in the back leg. Now, the warriors vowed to be ready if that bear ever came down from the sky. But they say that to this day, the bear is still hiding up there. And every year he comes close to Earth to see if the warriors are still waiting for him. The warriors know when he's close to the Earth because a little bit of blood from the bear's injury drips into the trees and changes the leaves' colors. So this was a way for them to explain the seasons. So can you think of a time when the leaves on our trees change colors? Anyone know when the leaves might change to that beautiful kind of reds and oranges on there? Yeah, so in the autumn or the fall, right? So they said that that was when the bear was coming closer to the earth and that his blood was dripping down onto the leaves, changing them that pretty color. Now, what's really cool here is that we can actually see this happening in real time in our sky, right? So I can play with time even more here. So let's say it is today, right? May. Let's say that it is, let's say it is 8 o'clock at night. So that is going to be 20. It's 8:15 at night. So in May at 8:15, we see Ursa Major right up here in the night sky. He is super just way up there, right? The furthest away from the horizon. But as we start to move through the seasons, now we're in June at 8:15, July at 8:15. August. And so now you can start to see he's creeping down. September, it's fall, it's autumn. So now our leaves are starting to change color. And there he is at nighttime. He's creeping low on the horizon. October, November, December. And then, of course, as we get into springtime, he's climbing high into the sky again until, of course, we get to where we are now back in May. So everyone, again, that bear creeps down on the horizons, and that helps them to understand seasons. Now, we talked a little bit about asterisms, right? The Big Dipper is an asterism. Well, there is actually another pretty famous one that we can look at in the night sky. We kind of looked at him a little bit before. But anyone happen to see a cluster of stars in the night sky that they often can recognize? There's 3 of them together. You might have heard about it before. I'll give you a little hint. It's an article of clothing. Anyone happen to see one of those in the night sky? Something that helps you keep your pants up, perhaps? Anyone know what constellation or asterism I might be referring to here? That is, of course, yes, Orion and Orion's belt right here. So these 3 stars make up Orion's belt. Very, very bright stars. And there's not really anything else like it in the sky. That grouping of those stars are very noticeable because they are closer and they're in a straight line. They're the only stars actually that we can see that are like that. So very easy to see even with lots of light pollution like we have here in New York. So Orion's got some fun stories too. In Greek mythology, Orion was a great hunter. He even was said to have killed Taurus the bull, who's right next door to him, right up here. So nice little comparison there in the sky. But, he liked to brag a lot about the fact that he thought he was such a great hunter. And of course, it's not very nice to brag and go around telling people that you're better than them. Well, Orion was friends with Artemis, who you might recall I mentioned earlier, who's goddess of the hunt. Now, she respected animals. She believed you should actually only kill them if you needed them for food or for survival, not just for sport. But Orion kept wanting to show off and just killing those animals for fun. So the other gods took note of this and they decided to punish Orion by sending a giant scorpion after him named Scorpius. So they fought long and hard, and to this day, they are actually still chasing each other through the night sky. But here's a really interesting thing. You will never see the 2 of them out at the same time. They rise and fall on opposite sides of the sky. So Orion falls in the west on the horizon, just as Scorpius rises in the southeast. They're always chasing each other. And we can actually see that now. So Orion's right here. Keep your eye on Orion as I fast forward through time again. So he is going to be setting right over here. And then you are actually going to be able to see Scorpius, the scorpion, come up too. Ooh, slow down a little bit. So Orion's going down over here. And then coming up over on the horizon over here, you will see Scorpius, the scorpion. Of course, Antares right there is the largest and brightest of those stars in the Scorpius constellation. So Scorpios, if you are a Scorpio, I saw some of you were in the chat. That means your birthday is probably maybe around November-ish, maybe end of October. So there you go. They're always chasing each other, but they're never in the same place at the same time. So you can see Orion. You can see Scorpius. Scorpius is actually also the name of the constellation that is Maui's fishhook, if you've ever seen Moana, or if you are familiar with Polynesian stories in the Pacific Ocean. It's the hook that the demigod Maui uses in order to lift up. You can see that hook of it right there in order to lift up the Polynesian islands, which is another great culture that's got some amazing stories too. And in fact, they've got one about Orion as well. So I'm going to rewind time just a little bit again. We're going to look at Orion one more time. All right, there he is. And again, now about this asterism of his belt, these 3 stars. There's another fun story we can tell about a little girl and her baby shark. Maybe you know a song about that, but please probably don't want to sing it. You don't want to bother your grown-ups there. So in Tonga, which is an island near Fiji in the Pacific, the 3 stars that form Orion's belt tell the story of Hina and her pet shark. So Hina was a beautiful young girl, and one day her brothers were fishing, and they caught her a baby shark. Now, they gave the shark to her as a pet for her birthday, and they created a pool in the reef where the shark could live as Hina was watching over it. But one day during a violent storm, it blew down a lot of buildings on their island, and it damaged the reef where the shark was living. So the waters rose up and swept the shark out to the big wide ocean, and it swam away. Hina was devastated, obviously. She was so sad. Her shark was gone. So she begged her parents to take her out to the sea to find her shark. So the 3 of them climbed into a canoe together, and they searched the ocean far and wide until finally a fin came out of the waters. And Hina knew this was her shark. So she begged and she begged and she begged the shark to come home with her. But the shark had tasted freedom. He didn't want to go back to that tiny reef pool. He was so excited out in the big ocean. So Hina was really sad and didn't want to leave her friend. So she begged and begged the gods, and their canoe rose up into the sky. And so now they say that those 3 stars are Alotulu, which means 3 in a boat. So they say that's her and her parents staying up in the sky with that baby shark. So, my friends, I want to pause one more time and see if we have any other questions in the meantime. Are there other constellation stories about the seasons? So, yes, there are. I'm going to put this up, make it a little easier. So, yes, there's other constellations. There's a ton of other constellations about the seasons. In fact, the constellation of Virgo is another one. She is, of course, always depicted as a beautiful maiden. She's recognized in many cultures as the bringer of spring. So, the ancient Greeks often thought that when she was in the sky, that meant that spring was going to be coming. She often is seen there. She's a constellation of Virgo. Again, she's often seen in the sky, high overhead in the spring and in the summer. But then as she's going down, her story, the story of Persephone, of course, she was kidnapped by Hades, the god of the underworld. And so he kidnaps her and brings her down during half of the year. Her mother is Demeter, the goddess of the summer. There she is, Virgo, goddess of the summer and the harvest, rather. So whenever she's down underground, her mother's very sad and she misses her. But then when she comes back up, she's very happy and everything is blossoming and the food is abundant again. So yes, that is another really great story that allowed those cultures in order to see when the different seasons were. Tons of stories like that. All right, any other questions? Why can't we see many stars in New York City? Yeah, I mentioned that, the sun scatters a lot of light around the atmosphere during the day. It covers up the stars. Well, same thing happens, but, here on Earth and here in New York City in particular, we have a lot of light pollution. So that's all the ground light that's coming up from our cities and the buildings. It kind of gets scatters around too, blocks our ability to see those stars. So if you ever go camping or someplace that's a little bit more out away from the city, often you can see a lot more stars on a clear night, but definitely not as many as you'd see, out in the desert or something like that. Now, everyone, I mentioned, if you've seen Moana, you might have seen her out there adventuring in the great wide beyond. She's in her boat. So she actually uses the stars in order to navigate where she's going. And that is something that a lot of navigators and sailors used to do throughout history. So remember, I said we have Polaris, the North Star, was really great at helping sailors to figure out where north was. And the ancient navigators also had another couple of tricks up their sleeves to figure out where they were in the world, kind of literally, because they used their hands. Now, it's certainly not the most precise way of doing things. Eventually, they developed gadgets to help them out. And now, of course, we have GPS. But I'll teach you a few things that you can do with your hands in order to see where you are in the night sky. So we are going to be looking a little bit at something called latitude. If you've ever seen a map, you might notice sometimes they've got lines that go up and down and side to side, right? Those are the lines of latitude and longitude. So latitude, I always like to say it's kind of like somebody sat on it, so made it fat. It's the wide one. And then longitude is up and down. My teacher said it's because it's the long ones, but in maps, the long ones are always this one. So don't remember that. Just remember somebody sat on it. It's fat. So the latitude lines go across. They can tell you exactly where something is in terms of where it is in relation to the equator. So the equator, of course, is that band that goes around the center of the Earth. It's kind of like the waistband, the belt maybe, goes around. And that we say is at 0 degrees latitude. So depending on if you are above or below that line, you are going either north or south that many degrees. So the Intrepid and many ships used coordinates like this while they were sailing. Of course, they had, again, fancier gadgets. But let's pretend you're outside. You're looking up at the sky. If you extend your arms all the way out, okay, so this is all going to be relative to your own size and where you are, of course. But if you extend your arms all the way out, that relative distance, they say that the width of your pinky finger is said to be 1 degree. So if you put it sideways like this, if this is the horizon that you see, you're sailing, so the water meets the sky, the width of your pinky finger, they say, is 1 degree. Now, the width of your knuckles across your hand is 10 degrees. So imagine that's 10 pinky fingers high, maybe. That's 10 degrees. And then the length of the whole span of your hand, outstretched. I'm going to lean back so you can see my whole hand. So that is from the tip of your thumb to the top of your fingers there, or you could say 2 fists, is 20 degrees, okay? So either one of those would work for that. So based on those measurements, you can actually count out how many degrees up from the horizon, this only works in the northern hemisphere, up from the horizon the North Star is, because again, you can only see the North Star from the northern hemisphere, you can determine, though, using your hands, the latitude that you are at. So how far north above the equator you are on the planet. So, for instance, New York, where we are at the Intrepid Museum, is just over 40 degrees north on a map. So you could figure that out a few ways. You could put, fist over fist 4 times. So you'd say we are 4 fists tall. You could also do the 2-hand span thing like that. So you could say we are 40 degrees up. But let's say you're not in New York City. Let's say you are in Mexico. Let's say you're in Mexico City. Mexico City is 20 degrees north. So it'd be half of that. You can use, again, 2 fists or just 1 large outstretched hand. And based on all of that, if you are looking at the horizon, again, the North Star should be right here, right at the top of your finger. Now, again, this is all based on how far north you are, just based on using your hands and the North Star. But of course, there's people who live in the southern hemisphere, of course. We have south of the equator, people like Moana. They can't actually see the North Star. So instead, they see some constellations that are a little different. They see something called crux, all right? Now, this is what they call the Southern Cross. Our Earth is tilted slightly on an axis, so we can't always see the same exact things. But if we were to look at the southern sky, they see a constellation that looks just like it's 4 stars. So if you imagine 2 lines intersecting the tip of each one, there's 4 there. They've got crux, so you can imagine crux is kind of like a North Star. But then there's also 2 stars to the side of it called pointer stars. So again, you could say these are kind of like the pointer stars of our Big Dipper that help us define the North Star. So they've got stars to help them define crux. And they have to do a little bit of math now, unfortunately. It's not as easy as we have here. In the southern hemisphere, they draw an imaginary line down from the 2 brightest stars of the crux of the cross. All right, so just imagine a line going straight down from like these fingers, okay? Then they take the pointer stars, they find the midway point between the pointer stars, and then they draw a line straight down from that. And where those 2 lines intersect is where south is. They have to kind of look at it that way. So it's a little bit more complicated there. We are very lucky in the northern hemisphere that we only have to really look at the northern star there. But that's a way that they were able to do it. And then same thing with their hands. They could figure out, okay, let's say they're in Australia and it's 20 degrees south. So again, for them, in order to find that, that would be 2 fists in order to find that point. And there's the 20-degree line. So it's pretty cool. So now you know how to use your latitude if you're ever lost out at sea like Moana. And what can I say except you're welcome. So let's head back to New York. The last thing I want to point out is just that in addition to these ancient cultures, of course, they saw some other really cool things in the sky. I am going to pull up Stellarium one more time. They saw some other things in the sky that were bright and big. And oftentimes they often were colored. Sometimes they had different colors to them. But also, they moved, which was a little bit strange. Now, of course, we've got stars that move in the night sky, right? But let me pull up Stellarium here for you one more time. All right. So the stars that they saw moved a little bit distractedly. It was a little bit different than the pattern and the rotation that they're used to seeing with the other stars. They weren't rotating around, for example, the North Star. Instead, they were seeing it just sort of wandering throughout the sky. And they would look at that and they would realize this is a little something different. So the ancient Greek named them their word that meant wanderer, which was planetes. Anyone want to take a guess what planetes might mean? What does it sound like? Planetes. Yeah, it sounds pretty much exactly like what you think it does. Planetes is planets. So that's where we got the name for the planets. And so we can actually see on here as well. Let's see if I can pull it up as they're coming around. Oh, let me label some things here for us. I'll turn those off. We can often see some of these planets. There you go, Zack Attack. Perfect. So we can see some of these planets that are in the sky as they come around here. And they're often lit up in these colors, like I mentioned too. So I'm going to pull up one of them that we can definitely see very easily in the night sky. All right, and that one is, of course, the one that is very red and bright in our sky. Gonna have it come on up. Oh, let's go the other way. Here it comes. So we've got Castor and Pollux. You might remember that from that story. And as it's coming up over the horizon, there we have Mars. All right. So Mars, again, it looks like that glowing red eye in the night sky, doesn't it? It really does stand out from the other ones. And that's why they named it Mars. Mars is the god of war, right? So they thought it was like a glowing red eye or blood in the sky, named after the god of war. Makes a lot of sense. And it really gets that color because of all of the iron oxide. If we were to zoom in, we can actually see there's basically a large covering of rust on top of that planet. So it gives us that red color, that dusty layer. We currently, of course, have our Perseverance rover up there searching for possible signs of past life on Mars in an area called the Jezero Crater. Scientists believe that that was once an ancient river delta and lake. So who knows what we'll see up there. But we can see other planets in the sky as well. And with a telescope, certainly we can see even more. Neptune, for example, is often blue. We see Neptune as blue. Neptune, the god of the sea, that's where it got its name. So you can understand why it's blue. But we can see other things too. You can see Jupiter and Saturn, even with telescopes. Venus sometimes is very bright in the night sky as well. But again, Pliny teased those wanderers wandering through the night sky. So, my friends, I would love to see if there are any other questions before we wrap up for today. Any other last questions before we leave? So, why do stars twinkle? All right, so stars give off that kind of flickering, twinkling movement because, it's actually light that's bending as it's coming in through the atmosphere. Remember, we said as the atmosphere is there, it's kind of spreading around that light. It's actually bending the light a little bit as it comes through. So, slows it down. It kind of makes it look twinkling. But in actuality, it's a bit of an illusion to us here on Earth. When we go into space, the stars look different and they're a bit more steady. There's a different kind of star out there called a pulsar that kind of gives off something like that too. But here on Earth, when we see what looks like twinkling stars, it's actually just kind of a special effect that's added that we are seeing because we're living here on Earth. All right. Any last questions? How many stars are in the universe? Ooh. So in a nutshell, everyone, we don't know. Scientists are always discovering new stars every day. But I believe the last figure that I heard, I think there were at least, because they're always finding new ones, over 70 sextillion known stars. So that's 7 with, I think, 22 zeros after it. So that's a lot. Of course, we can't all see them from here, though. The number that we can see here on Earth is closer to about 7,000 or 8,000. But it just gives you an idea that, if you took every grain of sand, every little tiny piece of sand on every beach here on Earth, every tiny little piece, and you counted them all up, there would still be more stars than even that. So that is a lot to wrap your head around. For sure. Zacatech says that is a number. It's true. That is a number. It's a very, very big number, in fact. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So great question there. We still don't know exactly how many stars there are. But my friends, if you have any other questions about our programs, you can feel free to reach out to us through our website, intrepidmuseum.org, or also through social media. I would like to thank you all so much for watching, sharing your questions and comments today. As you know, the museum has introduced a number of new live streams, so please do follow and subscribe to this channel or visit our website for the latest streaming schedule. And also, if you're able, your donations of any amount will help to keep our programs free or low cost. And you can also explore becoming a member online. Our museum is actually now open to the public Thursdays through Sundays, 10 to 5, and we will be reopening much larger for 7 days a week in the coming month as well. Our next family program is Thursday at 3 p.m. It is going to be Flying in Style. So we'll be talking a little bit about some of the decorations and the color schemes that you can find on some of our super cool planes and what they mean. And once again, that is Thursday at 3 p.m. right here on our streaming platforms. I'd also like to invite you to join us this Thursday at 5 p.m. for our next Virtual Astronomy Live, a really exciting monthly event that we host. This month, we're going to be talking to NASA scientists Ryan Ziegler and Juliana Gross, who keep and study the samples that are brought back from space. So these are things like moon rocks and meteorites and all these exciting things that we are able to pick up while we're out in space. And beforehand, I will actually be doing a short presentation all about things that we left on the moon. So things like golf balls and little memorials to fallen astronauts and even a mini museum, believe it or not. So be sure to tune into that. That's going to be on Twitch starting at 5 p.m. That's when the pre-show starts, followed by the main event, and it's all free. And you can find out more information on our website and how to access that at intrepidmuseum.org. So once again, thank you all so much for joining us today. Hopefully we'll see you online for an upcoming program. And thank you again so very much. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.